Hey, everybody! Welcome back to another episode of Conversations, the show where we talk about all the important conversations we should be having, but maybe aren't. I'm really excited to have this conversation today because I'm a big believer in the fact that everybody's brain is different and everybody's brain is beautiful. But as a society, we love to say, like, this is a normal brain, this is a not normal brain, this is a not normal brain. And this concept of normal ends up permeating all our beliefs, our workplaces, and really everywhere else in society. And when I met Carole Jean, we just had this amazing conversation about, really about that. We went much deeper than that, and I'm sure we'll go much deeper today because this is what we do. But it just is. I wanted to have this conversation to really get this out there about different brains, being able to support different types of brains, the strengths of different types of brains, and weaknesses, because even neurotypical people have weaknesses when it comes to brains. And just being able to have a conversation about it without being like, that's abnormal, that's normal, and creating this break. And at the end of the day, most of us are working, right? So most of us are going to work of some kind. And without incorporating these types of things into the work conversation, we are really missing out on people's genius. And we have robots to do things that are robot things, but we have people to do things that are people things. And if we erase our peopleness and replace it with robotness, then just bleh. That just sounds bad. So we're going to talk about this today. And as with all of these conversations, I encourage you guys to get in the conversation. So, hey, Dan. Hey, LinkedIn user. My brain actually has been really hurt this week too, LinkedIn user. But
now that's Emily. Hey, Emily.
Hey, Emily. It's really awesome to be able to have these types of spaces because for whatever reason, our brains might be hurting. Here's a space where we can just kind of let that go and explore and learn and grow and test our perspectives and all those things. So this is the point of the chat and getting you guys in the conversation too, is we want to hear your thoughts, your perspectives, your questions, your insights, because we know a lot of you joining us here today are also working in the space. So you have really valuable insights. We want to share them with everybody who's listening. So please feel free to get in the chat and share with us what you are thinking as well.
Before we hop in, do.
Yes, please. Because I saw who was RSVP'd for this, and it was a lot of amazing people. Hi, Lydia. Welcome. And my pleasure. I'm always excited to host these types of conversations. So before we get too far into me and Carole Jean just talking about all the things, Carole Jean, can you give us a little introduction to who you are and why you're so passionate about this topic?
Yes. Thank you, Tracy. I am Carole Jean Whittington. I am the founder and principal of a company called Mind Your Autistic Brain. Our focus is specifically on helping modern work companies, modern workplaces, and healthcare practices incorporate and best support all brain types from a perspective of communication, culture, and needs, because those are things that we all need as humans. There is no normal, folks, really and truly. We think there is a normal. We say, oh, that's normal, that's not normal. Well, our normal is not the person next to us. They don't have the same normal. So really, it's kind of hard to say that there is a particular normal, right? So I think what really helps and I have a particular division of Mind Your Autistic Brain called the NeuroDrive team. And we are a panel, a team of autistic and ADHD, dyslexic, dyspraxic, you throw it in there. We are the most ultimate neurodivergent team you could possibly put together. And I intentionally chose everyone on this team. And what we do specifically is go into modern companies who are seeking to have diverse companies, neurodiverse companies. And they're like, we want to do this, but we're not sure how. Number one, we say, look, you can't ask a bad or wrong question. There is no uncomfortable question, maybe. We're going to get comfortable being uncomfortable, but ask us those things you're afraid to ask. Number one, I've been in corporate. I've been in those places where we're going. I have been HR'd to the point that I'm scared to ask any questions. So we try and create a space where We're like, look, this is the world. If you want to do this, you want to create this culture, this is important to you in your company, this is important to you in your healthcare practice. This is what's got to change first. We got to ask some of these uncomfortable questions and be able to talk about them in a safe place. And we try and provide that safe place and set it up. And it's such a beautiful thing because I love the conversations that we have, Tracy, because you talk about culture. You talk about, hey, we can robot stuff. And you wrote that great article last month about, what are we roboting, folks? And what are we like really showing up? And right now, in the economic climate that we're in, how we're communicating and how we're connecting, not just in our workplace, but in our home life, is under a lot of stress. And let's just be honest, folks, as humans, we kind of stink at communicating just on the general. I don't care what your brain is. We don't always do it well, right? We do it messy. We get it wrong. We're judging the other people because they didn't do it right or the way that we wanted them to. And right now, as things start to get financially tighter, I mean, we are in a place of inflation right now. We are also looking at some of the biggest companies in the industries announcing hiring freezes right now. There's a lot of things happening. Our landscape is changing. And as I'm sure Dan will chime in, he is an amazing recruiter. And hey, Dan, he's out there in the room, and we talked, Anna was sharing this last night. We were talking about, things are changing. And what are we doing as individuals? What are we doing as companies? What are we doing as parents, as leaders in our own life? Because I always say you got to be the leader in your own life, number one. And that means you got to show up for you first. And that's, with your family at home. And that then translates into work. And when we're doing that, it's just to recognize that, the way that I communicate, there's two different things. I like to deliver information one way. I like to receive information in another way. It's not always the same, and as Oscar talks about, then you got to factor in, how are you listening? And when we factor in and we just think about all of these things, it's like, whoa, am I doing it right? And if I'm finally just kind of doing it, I think maybe I'm figuring it out from my brain type. Then what do I do if somebody has a different brain type and theirs is completely different? Where do I even start?
Well, and I think I find this in so many conversations, Carole Jean, is this concept of right and wrong, right? There's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. And you mentioned everybody has their own, like, what is right for me and how I communicate is not necessarily how I receive. And this something that really bothers me specifically about marketing is because people will go out and say, like, well, you need to share this way on social media. And you're like, well, that can work. It's not that can't work. It's just that, like, you don't have to do that. If you try it and it feels right for you, then cool, you can keep doing that. But that also doesn't mean that, like, your ideal audience wants to consume your content that way or any of those things, right? Like, we try to make I think the human brain in general, although I don't like to make generalizations, but we like to make things easier, right? Like, it's easier for us to see a way that's right, that feels good, and just, like, keep going with that. But just exactly what you said right now, Carole Jean, is there's no one right way, especially for multiple relationships, right? Like, you and I have a way that works for us in terms of communicating. The way I communicate with you isn't the same way that I communicate with all people. I remember having an employee when I was in corporate who just said to me, I don't want you to send, like, lots of messages, right? Like, can we just have a 5-minute meeting every day and we'll go through, like, all the important things? And I was like, yes, sure. Who doesn't have 5 minutes, right? Plus, I'm a leader. I should make time for my people. So that's a different conversation. But I was like, this is so effective. And I was such a big fan of him because he knew what would be the most effective way to get information from me. And he stood up and was like, this is the most, like, effective way for me to get information from you. And I invested in that and making it the most productive way for me to share information with him, right? So on the broad scale, it gets really big for our brain to think, like, I gotta have a different communication relationship with every single human I interact with. And if you want to build a relationship with that person, then you probably do, right? Like with all 8 billion people on planet Earth, no, you don't. But for the people that you actually want to build a relationship with, you do. So, like Carole Jean, in your work, do you see any easy ways? I don't like to promote easy ways because I don't believe in easy ways, but are there things that you've seen that have worked, that have helped people kind of just shift their thinking into this, oh my gosh, that's really overwhelming to think that I have to have, like if I'm a company with 250 employees, that I have to have a different style for 250 employees?
Like I have to have a different roadmap for each individual person. Okay.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
Yes and no. And you led right into like the perfect next step in the conversation, Tracy. And I love how you always tee these things up. Like, seriously. Great minds, right? I love our differently wired brains. But what's really beautiful about this is, as part of the NeuroDrive Blueprint, we look at, and specifically, and our director of needs and accommodations is Corinne M. Gilmore, and her background is in special education. So if you really want to get down to the nitty gritty of what are our human needs, and Jessica Michaels is our director of culture and communication. And it's a fantastic thing because when we start to, and we can break this down and make it super simple, and it's just, what are your preferences? What do you need as an individual? And when you start to just look at it as everyone has a different need, everyone has a different preference, everyone has sort of like your coworker has a preference and a style of learning that works best for them. And right now, that truly is one of the most important, critical, key components as a company that you can start looking at. Because if you are cutting down on your workforce and you're eliminating positions, you are then taking those things that were being done by other people and you're rolling them over to other people. So now they've got double or triple the workload. You're not changing their hours, you're not changing their pay, you're increasing the load, the cognitive load that's required, because you're trying to look for ways to structure, to survive, and be able to thrive coming out on the other side. One of the biggest benefits of having differently wired brains in this particular economy that we're in right now when it comes to communication is that when you are looking at someone as like, oh, hey, do you like to have a quick 5-minute chat, or would you rather me send you one email with everything in it bullet pointed? And what's your peak performance hours during the day? Are you a morning person? You an afternoon person? You a late night person? And then kind of knowing those things about ourselves. So when we start to really look at, okay, I don't have to have like a map for every individual person. Well, you don't. But when you have a set of awarenesses that simply is, everybody has a different need. Everybody has different peak performance hours, like where their brain is firing on all cylinders. They are super creative. That is their time to jam. And when you are looking at planning projects and work and communicating, I mean, this even happens in our relationships, right? Because my partner is a late night person. I am an early morning person. He says I am like the Disney princess throwing the curtains open and the birds are tweeting. And he's just like, would you please? Could really, Carole Jean. And at the end of the day, I'm like, oh, can you just be quiet and not talk to me? And he's like, oh, I'm awake and I want to talk about all the things now. And it's 8:00 at night and my brain is going, no. But when we just look at each person from a human to human connection and just start with, we all have different peak performance hours. We all have different needs and preferences, like write to me, but I need you to talk to me. Even though I'm an auditory processor, I have an auditory processing delay. So you may have to just give me a minute before you start on the next thing, or I need closed captions in a meeting late in the afternoon. And these are all very simple things. And it's not like I'm having to have this complex roadmap. It's just simply through these small things. We have a conversation and I just identify, like, Tracy, what's your peak performance hours? Like, when are you on fire? And you're like, okay, what? So tell me, when are your peak performance hours, Tracy?
Well, for like strategic work, first thing in the morning. So for me, it's like I wake up and my brain is thinking strategy. But for creative, I don't wake up and my brain is thinking creatively. And so I've actually found that like mid-afternoon is peak performance time for me to be creative. And it's something really interesting that I've even explored for myself on the personal front is that I used to, again, because I worked in corporate, I would wake up at 5 a.m. so I could work out first thing in the morning because that was the time that was available to me to work out. But my body hates working out at 5 o'clock in the morning. And now that I run my own business and work from home, like a Peloton ride at 10 a.m. is like my most impactful workout. And so I actually started to schedule my day around a mid-morning ride. And it's really interesting because I think even like if we're having these types of conversations in the corporate work environment, right? Like how big of a inconvenience are these things really, right? I was talking to somebody the other day who was saying like when he's really overwhelmed, he just needs to spend like 2 hours in his garden, right? And he's a senior leader. And I was like, what if they just let him? What if you just let him spend 2 hours in his garden, right? Like, I mean, it's if you are a neonatal nurse and your job is to save babies who are dying, then okay, maybe you can't take a 2 hour gardening break while you're on your shift. But like for most of us who are working in corporate work environments, there's a lot of fake urgency. And how much more performance could we get even in a smaller amount of time if we said like, hey, I'm going to let this guy have 2 hours. What if we let him have 2 hours a day to garden, right? And maybe he doesn't take it every day, but that's available to him. And so the productivity that he has in his 6 hours of work is like off the charts compared to people who sit there and drone for 8 hours a day. And when you're neuro-distinct, sitting there and droning. So, I mean, quite honestly, I don't know a lot of people who are humans that are good at being robots. Every single one I know hates that, right? Like, and you might like repetitive tasks, right? Like you might have a feeling of accomplishment doing the thing that you know that you're good at. Like even me, sometimes I'm like, I'm just going to do some Asana project management because that feels like I accomplished something. Because as an entrepreneur, there's some days where you're just like, did I move my business forward today? I don't know. Maybe, hopefully. But this is the point, right? Like, what if we just created more space for these types of conversations to get to know our employees? And Carole Jean, it makes me just think about this overarching commitment to curiosity in a work environment, right? Like, are we being curious or are we just showing up to drone the work? And Lydia's making a great point here about a teacher, right? Like, if you're teaching different students, different things, your brain, like all students' brains don't run the same way. And Alana is making like really great comments here too. As someone who identifies as ADHD, neurodivergent, and experienced working in the nonprofit sector for a decade, nonprofit orgs need to tune in and learn. I would say all orgs. We'll go. I like what ifs, right? Like, what if we tuned in to learn and adapt to people who work differently? As a gift, right? Like, this is the perspective. Like when we look at this as like being really curious and having fun, almost digging into these types of things instead of thinking like, oh my gosh, I have to create a new communication strategy with each person. Like, what if I created a new communication strategy with each person? How would that like make my life easier as a manager or as a company or as a spouse or however? So like getting excited to be curious about different brains. I mean, I know you and I both think that it's fun. But how do we incorporate this like curiosity or remind people? Because I do think people want to be curious, but we get kind of proceduralized. So how do we bring back the curiousness about how we can
the
contribute?
curiosity factor, that is such a critical component to really being human. Let's be honest, that's just like to being human, to being, I guess if you want to use it, and I don't really like using this, but like successful as a human, right? I am like the Kitsugumi of successful humans. I just highlight all the flaws. That's just, I just have learned to see the flaws as beauty. And not even flaws. They're just my unique traits, right? They're just who I am. You and I have talked about this, and you have written about it, and I really love it. And we've had some in-depth conversations when we talk about KPIs, key performance
So,
indicators,
shall we
right?
talk about KPIs? Because I will
Can we?
go off on that.
I know. So here's the thing. Part of our approach with our NeuroDrive Blueprint is that we're talking about driving metrics that matter. What are the
Okay,
metrics
let's
that we're
clarify
talking
that,
about?
because I think, like, I'm thinking about what
I
people
knew I was going to
told
tickle
me.
you on this one.
Sorry, guys. For those of you who don't know me, most KPIs are bunk, and I have written about them. I wrote an article not long ago specifically about sales KPIs. There's one in the works about marketing KPIs, but they make me angrier, so I have more to say. But it's just like a lot of I've heard that a lot of times, right? Metrics that matter. I think we hear it all the time, right? And still people will be like, the metrics that matter are the number of views that our ads get online. And you're So can we talk about what really matters when it comes to KPIs?
Thank you for the solidarity in the comments.
Yes.
Because Tracy and I are just hardcore no.
Hardcore no.
Hardcore no. But when we're talking about metrics that matter from the Neuro-Distinct perspective, when we're talking about this from our NeuroDrive Blueprint perspective, we're talking about getting back to the human factor of curiosity. I say, put your lab coat on, become the scientist. And number one, before you become the scientist, when you're in that mindset of I'm curious and compassionate curiosity, folks, there is a difference. You can be like snotty, judgy curious, or you can be compassionately awed and curious. And that is two very different things. You're going to see different things when you're coming at it from that perspective. And it's not about driving all of these things that we've been taught over time. It's like, oh, this person needs to be able to do this job, but if something happens, I got to be able to plug them in over here. Because that honestly is setting up whatever structure or system or process you have for failure. It's setting you up to struggle. And guys, the short struggle bus sucks.
See,
the short struggle bus sucks. I have been on it. I have lived there. I have tried driving that bus, and I wrecked it.
And this is why, like, I want everyone who's listening to this right now to think about whether they are on the struggle bus or whether they are not on the struggle bus. And if we're on the struggle bus, it's fine to be on the struggle bus. We have all been on the struggle bus. It's not unusual to be on the struggle bus, but are we investing our time, effort, and energy in staying on the struggle bus? Or are we investing it in getting off at the next stop?
That's such a big part of it, Tracy. There's a book called A Complaint-Free World. Mm-hmm. And the author's last name is Bowden. And I loved this book. And there was just one quote in there that stayed with me. And it's, some people are an ouch looking for a hurt. Some people are an ouch looking for a hurt. And we're always talking about, and one of the things that I asked on my page yesterday, I said, if as an employer, what are the things that you look for? What are the qualifications you look for promotion within, right? What are you looking for? What are you like tracking every day, or within a system or something? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that people were commenting, we're looking for creativity, we're looking for problem solvers, right? Because the worst thing, we have all been in that meeting, guys, this, we have all been in that meeting, and it is so painful, and we have got the chronic complainer. There is no solution. There is only, this is a problem, and I don't like it. Now, there is a difference between the person who is like, okay, 10 steps ahead in this project, I see this roadblock. We need to be thinking about that. That's different than the person that's just like, this is a bad idea. This sucks. I don't like this. This just doesn't feel good, or, and blah, blah, the wah, wah, right? And when we're talking about these things, I mean, honestly, we're talking about communication. We're talking about connection. We're talking about different styles. So it's like, is the person that's complaining and they're not really giving solutions and, maybe they're having a bad day.
Uh-huh.
Is it the norm? I mean, we get in these cycles and their habits, you talked about this and mentioned it earlier. We are creatures of habit. We get into habit. Our brain, number one, seeks to keep us safe, right? So like, don't step off that ledge. And number two, our brain automates everything that we do to conserve energy. You don't think every step through when you brush your teeth. So as we're talking about, well, what happens when we're struggling? What happens like in a company, in an organization, in a family, because we're going to be facing some of these same things in our family as the budget bill to get real tight right now. It's the same things we're facing in companies, and the fear factor. When we're talking about what are the metrics that really matter, what are your KPIs, all of those things, you can't get to any of that and really set anything that's worthy of being measured until you check in with what's important. What do I value as an individual? What do we value as a company? And what does that look like? What does that look like when things are hard? What does that look like when things are easy and things are just trucking along and it's all great? Because we don't get to the other side of the hard and we don't get off the struggle bus or even decide to step off the struggle bus. Because if we're comfortable and that's sort of where we've decided that feels normal, right? Here we go back to the normal thing again.
Mhm.
If we've been on the struggle bus so long that we don't even distinguish that we're on it,
Mhm.
we can't necessarily get off.
Right.
But what we can do sometimes to shift that awareness is to go, what am I really valuing right now? What's important?
Mhm.
What matters? And you got to look at the human aspect first, because nothing happens. Revenue, production, innovation, none of it happens if people aren't communicating, and people aren't, all people, no matter your brain, your neurotype, your needs, your disability, your peak performance hours, the color of your shirt, or the shoes you wear, until we're communicating, well, this is where I'm supported best and what works for me. But we got to know what those things are for ourselves first before we can communicate them to somebody else to get those needs met. So when we are operating in a world of unmet needs, which, hello, folks, that's the struggle bus. It is, honestly, breaking it down into like the most simple vernacular in the whole world, is we are living in a world of unmet needs, and we're constantly struggling, and we're worrying, and we're afraid, and we're frustrated, and we're mad. And all of these emotions come from this. So if we just step back and go, what's important? What do we value? What do I need? How do I get that need met? And then we start asking the person next to us those same questions.
Yeah. I think this is such an important piece of the conversation, Carole Jean, because none of this happens unless we do the work, right? And yes, and Jen is sharing here about employers and everyone to shift their awareness, right? Because if I always see this struggle for leaders as well, right? Because if only the leaders are interested in shifting and the employees don't want to play the game, then we still don't have a shift, right? Like we then we're still having unmet needs, because now leadership is saying, hey, we're shifting this direction, and everybody else is like, what? This isn't why I came to work here. And I think about your example of the person who's like the I like to call them the debater, right? Like, and some people will call them negative Nancy, but
I
those
call them sandpaper people.
Oh, it's rough. Ha!
They are, but you know what's really great about that sandpaper person? When we start to shift our feelings around that, and we go, you know what? They're rubbing me, but they're also smoothing my rough edges.
Right. And this is the thing. Like, this is where the perspective shifts comes, right? Is that like the shift is in our relationship to each other, right? Like, I can't just sit here and be like, I changed my perspective. Like, it's good. It's good. It's not bad. It's not bad to sit there and change your perspective and keep it to yourself. But unless you use that new perspective to build those two-way relationships with people, and I think one of the things I keep thinking about, and this is why I love conversations, right? Or the concept of conversation is just that it's two ways. Right? If I show up here and I just talk about a topic for 30 minutes, it's just me narrating my thoughts on a thing. When I talk to another person, I get the opportunity to explore my thoughts and compare them. Although I don't like to compare, but to compare them to other people's thoughts, not in the way so that I feel like my thoughts are wrong or my thoughts are bad, but it gives me that opportunity to broaden my horizons, to say like, huh, that's an interesting way of thinking about it. One of my favorite things I learned in the Dale Carnegie program was this concept of tell me more. Right? Like, tell me more, because like I legitimately am not understanding where this is coming from, right? And if you are one of those people who sees, and I think there are some brains who like they see the gaps, right? Like do you see this gap that's happening in this plan that you guys are going for? Like, I'm here. I've seen this. Like, I see this a lot specifically in the financial industry because people are trying to keep like investment safe and all of those things, right? Like, their brains are very good at seeing gaps. And so we can shut down the people who see the gaps, or we can get curious about what is the gap? Is there something legitimately I'm not missing? If I have too much ego attached to what I know, then I won't get curious in that arena. Is it something that's going on with that person, right? Like, recently my husband shared a story with me about how one of his team members was just kind of like acting very unusually, and his dad was very sick. Right? And so he's probably dealing with a whole bunch of thoughts and feelings and emotions he never has, and he doesn't know how to incorporate that in his work environment, right? And when we are just like legitimately curious, not in a right or wrong. I'm not trying to figure out if I'm right. I'm not trying to figure out if you're wrong. I'm just trying to understand, right? And sometimes we can't understand, right? Sometimes our experiences are so different from someone else's that we can't understand. But investing in that two-way relationship, that someone feels seen, that someone feels heard, and that, I think that's a big piece that's missing in the general work conversation, is that, again, I love my what ifs, right? What if we could just show up and make people aware that I saw them today? Like, I see you. Maybe it's because I see you struggling, right? Maybe it's because I see you killing it and I want to celebrate that. Maybe it's that I see you not contributing, but normally you contribute. Like, what is that? Right? And just like shifting our awareness outside of ourselves to the people around, because it adds value to us to take that kind of action. So just kind of bringing that kind of concept, Carole Jean, back to the focus of the conversation today, which is neuro-distinct employment movement, right? Like how we're celebrating all of these unique brains. What do we need to think about in terms of how we as a person show up to either invite this or not invite this at work, and start to see like, what is stopping me?
Well, it starts with asking, number one, what is our goal? What is it that we want to achieve? Who are we being in the world? Because we can do things and we got to-do list all day long. But that doesn't really get to the heart of why someone's motivated. We want to check stuff off the list. That might be a temporary motivation, but it's, who are we being in the world? How are we showing up? What is the impact that we want to have as a company? This is a culture check. This is a company purpose check that has to happen. If, let's say, number one of the biggest barriers for neurodistinct brains is not feeling safe to disclose at work.
Yes. Yeah. Huge.
That is one of the biggest barriers. We had a conversation yesterday that I was really loving, because this was bringing up something that the NeuroDrive team has been talking about. It's all fine and dandy if you want to set up a neurodiversity at work initiative. But if the only place you're looking is in entry level positions, you're missing 40%. This is around the average from what's being calculated and researched now, because there are about 40% of your workforce right now who may or may not know that they are neurodistinct, but there's 40% differently wired brains in your company right now. And they're not all at the entry level position. There's some in the C-suite, folks, and I know lots of them, and they're not saying a word because there is not acceptance. There isn't enough knowledge about what that means to be differently wired.
Right.
And so that's a big challenge. That's a big barrier because the benefits of different brains, the benefits of diversity within your company, within your organization, within your family group. If there is one neurodivergent person in your family, there are more, folks. There just are. You may all think this is normal, quote unquote. We're back to the normal thing. Oh, this is normal. Everybody does this. Well, no, that's just because y'all are all differently wired, folks. That's just okay. But
I just
the
recently
perception.
learned that I'm apparently the weird one that makes sure I have a pair of socks that goes in the washing machine. So I have a pair of socks comes out. I've been sharing this with people because I learned this about my husband. He just throws laundry and doesn't make sure that there's like socks are together. And
Oh, I'm
but
right here with
apparently,
you. I make
okay.
sure that
And
they
I
are
was like,
too.
I have shared this with lots of people, and they're like, "You make sure." And I was like, "Oh, maybe I'm
Yes,
the
I
weird
do.
one."
No,
But
you're
I'm
not. Well,
still gonna
then,
do
okay,
it.
we're weird together.
Yeah, we're together. But
We're
this is
weird together.
actually this is the fun thing about that disclosure piece, right? Is that like this is where people get the opportunity to build connections, right? So we're not talking about like just communicating. We're talking about connecting. And if there's pieces of our personal brand that we're afraid to show at work because it's the thing I hate the word disability. Right? Like I hate it because like what is that? That's comparing something to normal. And I was so excited lately because my son gets this magazine subscription called Chirp. It's kids magazine. And they had the search and find picture. It was about balloons. So they're mostly finding balloons. But all of the people, and there were people in wheelchairs. There were people who were bald. There were people with only one arm, right? And I was like, oh, I am so a fan of this magazine. They have literally tried to represent every single type of person in this image. And like, I'm sure there were some that didn't get met, but you could tell that's what they were trying to do. And I was like, this is such, I have an aunt who's been in a wheelchair her entire life. And so I have this, like, she's not disabled. She can't walk, right? Like, and we take advantage of the fact that we can walk. But now I volunteer for an organization that helps create inclusive playgrounds for kids because why can't all kids play if they're even, and they're blind or they're in a wheelchair or whatever? And I'm on a tangent. But the point of this is when we treat a difference as bad or wrong or not normal, then we put these boxes up to protect ourselves, right? Because then I'm like, well, like somebody could work on Zoom and be in a wheelchair and nobody could even notice, right? Because it's actually irrelevant. And so society's narrative creates this is normal, this is not normal. And like you said, Carole Jean, we're at 40%. I would guess it's more than that, right? Because people aren't saying anything. There's people like
We're
me
gonna be
who
real conservative.
right. Like I haven't been diagnosed, and I haven't been diagnosed just because I don't care, right? Like if I am, if I'm not, I'm whatever. I have my brain. You like my brain, you don't like my brain. You decide. But when we create these boxes for ourselves, then it gets scary, right? It gets scary to show up and we don't. I think the difference I see in the conversation is that we have created so much fear that people don't own that part of who they are, right? They don't own the fact that, yeah, my brain thinks differently than other people. And that's an advantage, right? It's not a disadvantage. And again, it kind of comes back to ourselves. We could be interviewing at an organization who really values neurodiversity. And if we are still too afraid to show up and show, I'm like, this is my neurodiversity, and have that confidence to to be like, take it or leave it. And there's so much that goes into this conversation because we want to belong, we want to be accepted, but we also want to be ourselves. And how do we like find this really good combination of those two things? But I said this on another LinkedIn Live I did earlier this week, is that if we don't show up as our authentic selves, as all of the pieces of us, our brain, our body, our eyesight, our hairdo, right? Unless we show up with all of those things, we can't actually find the place we belong, because the best thing we're going to find is a place where the fake version of us belongs, which isn't the real version of us. So we're not going to belong there either.
And if we're talking about differently wired brains and we're talking about how we're showing up, some of the things that factor into burnout, be it neuromajority burnout or autistic burnout, which does vary slightly in some key aspects. And that number one difference between a burnout in a neuromajority brain and a neuro-distinct brain is that you could permanently and temporarily lose skills and abilities, which is kind of terrifying for those of us who've worked 40 plus years to obtain those skills and abilities, right? And one of the greatest contributing factors to that is masking. And then, as I say, I took masking to the professional level when I didn't know, and I was camouflaging. I was the most incredibly camouflaged human. I was the chameleon. And when we're showing up not as ourselves at work, because there isn't a sense of psychological safety, and we are then out of alignment, our internal world and our external world do not jive. They are in conflict. When that happens on a subconscious level, we feel detached. We're like, I don't know who I am. We don't feel authentic within ourselves. We don't feel like we are in our own skin. Those are some of the biggest contributing factors to burnout for all brains. And it's something that we can all seek to do something about. And it goes back to the key solution is authentic connection. Authentic connection with ourselves. You do this so beautifully, Tracy, in talking about your personal brand. That helps people get an alignment to who am I? What's important to me? What do I stand for? What matters to me? What do I love? What lights me up? What do I not like? What really turns me off, right? I mean, all of that is part of it. But sometimes when you don't know, especially for late identified people, you have managed to survive. You've been on the struggle bus, so you don't know you're still on it. It's just the norm. And you don't feel like you really are yourself, and you're chronically exhausted. And you're just showing up, doing the best you can do every day. But you haven't had the ability to really authentically be yourself, to really thrive, because the things that you need have gone unmet for so long, you don't even sometimes recognize you need them.
Mm-hmm.
But all of this comes to the surface with reflection and conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And that starts with like what we're doing here today. Companies, when they're under stress, and right now we're moving into that zone of stress, one of the best things that you can do is to start having some conversations about needs and preferences and what can we do, one human to another, to support each other's needs, so that in this very stressful time, we are not expending energy doing things that are out of alignment with the individual and out of alignment with our company. And we got to start with conversations.
Well, you know that I believe that that's true. I believe that all of the learning and the knowledge comes in conversations, because even if we're only like, if you're sitting there yourself and you're like, okay, personal development, here I come, right? Like, and you just sit there by yourself at your desk and you're like, what do I not know? What you don't know. Like, you don't know what you
I don't know a lot.
I don't know a lot as well. And there's some things I don't know that I don't care about knowing. And there's things that I don't know that I do care about knowing. But I don't know any of the things I don't know unless I show up in conversation with other people, because that's where I get opportunities to be presented with information I don't know. And it gives me the opportunity to try things on and be like, facts. right? I love hearing things where I'm like, yeah, this is true. Like there's this really cool conversation going on between Lydia and Elena in the chat. But it kind of comes down to this, right? Like that we've been focused on kids, right? So we diagnose kids, and Carole Jean, I know you and a lot of people that we talk to are late in their life. You've been like, oh yeah.
I say like everything else in my life, I should have late to the party, but I'm here.
But this is the thing, right? And we focus so much, and then Lydia sharing like, yeah, she just found out that like her partner is neurodiverse, and like,
Congratulations.
Yes, I agree, right? Like, and so here's the thing. I want to just talk about this for a minute because Lydia's point is talking about how they're pursuing this further so we can figure out how to be better supported at work. I just want to invite everybody to do that. To everybody, whether you've been diagnosed as neurodiverse or you haven't, or you have been diagnosed as disabled, or you haven't, right? Like, there's all unique ways that we feel supported, right? So this is one of the great activities I have my clients do, which is like, what makes you feel good? What makes you feel seen? What makes you feel heard, right? And unless we have clarity and knowledge of what those things are, we can't go purposely looking for them, right? And especially because I know a few of you in the chat are in a job transition where you're transitioning between industries, right? And so there are things in your previous industry that made you feel supported, and there's things that made you feel unsupported. And so if you're going to move forward into a place that feels more supportive, you have to identify the things that felt not supportive and find a place where you're not getting those things. And no place is perfect either, right? Like if I'm showing up in a place, I'm just going to use LinkedIn as an example, right? Like LinkedIn as a platform is not specifically curated for me, right? If you're working in an organization that has thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of employees, it's not. The whole business isn't specifically curated for you. And when you have clarity and awareness of how it could better support you, and you show up and you share those types of things, and again, like based on where you're working, that might be more welcome or less welcome. But when you have that, at least that confidence in yourself to say like, this is what I need. This is what I need to feel supportive. And I know some of you in the chat too have worked in really small organizations and assumed that because it's a small organization, you have more access to conversation. This is not necessarily true either, right? But if we're not going to own our side of the conversation, we're not going to show up and be like, hey, I really want to be productive here, and this is what it's going to take for me to be productive. Is that something that you feel like you can facilitate for me? And we can have a back and forth conversation again, because it's like two people, right? Two people in a relationship, got to have a conversation to figure out how to make this work. But if we don't invite the conversation, so we have this concept of having an environment that invites the conversation. And as leaders, there's a lot of self-work that we have to do, a lot of removal of ego that we have to do to say like, oh, I'm not here to be the person who knows everything. I'm not here to be the one who has all the answers. I am not here to be a dictator. I'm not here to be all these things. I am here to be fill in the gap with what you believe you're here to do. And are these activities that I'm doing supportive of that or detrimental to that? And not only for the neurodiverse crew, right? Like what if let's assume that 40% of the people around us, and it's probably higher than that, but let's assume that 40% are people who haven't shared that they're neurodiverse, and you don't know which 40% it is. How do you show up as an individual? If you're in the chat and you identify as neurotypical, have you considered how in a conversation this might be painful for someone who has an auditory processing delay, right? Like, have we thought about it? I had a lady on my show actually like quite a while back now, and one of the things that she said that really resonated with me, Eve Abalka Greece, it's very far back. If you guys want, I can find it for you and send you a link. But she said, like, with every action we're taking, is it inclusive or is it not inclusive? And if we don't ask the question, then we can never answer it. And sometimes we don't ask the question because we're afraid of the answer, because it's probably that we're not being
And the other
inclusive.
part is like, why should we care?
Mhm.
You know,
So
you
why
can
should
act.
we care? Why should we
Yeah.
care, Carole Jean, if we're being inclusive?
Why should you care? Because it actually benefits all people. It benefits humanity. It benefits, if you just want to get like real granular and you got to have like that KPI, you got to have that trackable goal, it impacts your bottom line, folks. First and foremost, it increases productivity, it increases innovation and creativity. It advances your ability to shift in a fast changing market. Right now is probably one of the most critical times to make sure that you have a great deal of not just diversity, but neurodiversity, because it's those differently thinking brains that are going to see 50 steps ahead. It's going to be the guy in the room or the girl in the room, because it was me, going, that's a great idea, but there's this and this and this, and everybody in the room's going to groan, they're going to roll their eyes, and everybody's going to get mad. And I'm going to challenge you right now to stop for just a second. Because when you start to see that communication style and that brain a little differently, you're going to go to this person and you're going to want to make sure they're on your team. Because they're not complaining, they're not being difficult. They want the project to succeed, and their brain is seeing things yours cannot. And what they want to do is say, okay, this is something that's coming up. I see this 5 steps, 20 steps ahead. If we just make this shift right here, right now, and we tweak this or we change this, that won't be there. And then we will be more productive. This will be the biggest success we can have. And when you're looking at putting greater demand on positions and people in your company, if you aren't making sure that you have a team and somebody that's going to see these things that you may not see and be able to go, oh, this would be a really great solution to this. And if you're not open to that, you're not curious or willing to kind of get uncomfortable with things that you don't maybe know about in the very beginning, but say, oh, tell me more about that, explain more about that, you're missing opportunities to survive and thrive
Mhm.
in a time right now. And research is showing, in retrospect, at the companies that were very intentional with creating diverse workforces in economic downturns, they came out ahead of the game.
Mhm.
And right now, this is why it is more important than any other time, because there is so much challenge right now. There's a lot of fear, but we sometimes have to check our fear. And it's normal. We're going to be afraid when things change. All humans. I don't care what your neurotype is. Yeah, as an autistic person, I don't love change. As an ADHD person, transition, I got to have that. Don't move me from one flow task to something else abruptly. But when we know these things and we're having these conversations, so much changes.
Mm.
And when you're not looking at more beyond entry level positions to create this diversity, then you're also hindering your ability to really be dynamic and effective in your industry.
Mhm.
You have to have this in all levels. You have to have neurodiversity, diversity in general, across the board in every level. And when you are viewing neuro differences as a deficit, number one, you're missing out. Number two, you're creating an environment where someone's not ever going to tell you.
Mhm.
And you then miss out on the genius. You miss out on saying, how can I support you? How can you support me? I like to have this, my coffee, I like my coffee like this, whatever that happens to be. And one of the things that will be coming up, because Autistics in the Workforce kicks off on Monday, August the 1st, and we have a fantastic campaign video series that will be showing autistics in the workforce. All of the amazing things that autistic people and neurodivergent people, ADHDers, dyslexics are doing in the world in areas other than STEM. Because we're everywhere, we love to do everything. We have communication panels, we have accommodation and need panels coming up. We have an incredible workplace culture conversation, and one of the episodes on the talk show is going to be featuring Tracy. So make sure you get that, because it is fantastic. Our conversation was so good, and we'll be wrapping up the month with a 90-minute HR recruiter panel where we are going to have Mark Crawley and his wonderful partner, Julia from Diversita from the UK. And they're going to be talking about, well, what do we need to know from a recruiting standpoint? What do we want our people to know from that perspective? We're talking about things. Irene Nexica is going to be joining us, and she is a neurodivergent brain. So, we've got people on both sides of the table in all of these conversations this month coming up, not just neuromajority, but all brain types are having conversations around what are the things that we need to do? How do we support each other? What's the culture? What's the preference? What's the communication style? And we've got all of our wonderful directors from the NeuroDrive team leading these panels all month, and we would love for you guys to join us.
And if you guys aren't already connected with Carole Jean, get connected on LinkedIn because you want to be. She is tagged in this post, so just click on her name and connect and say, hey, I saw you on the conversation show. We need to talk more about this. Should be totally down. And I just want to go back to this concept of genius as like the last thing today, right? Like if showing up and not supporting neurodiversity is erasing genius from your organization, is that what we really want to do? Right? Do we want to erase genius, or do we want to, I don't like the phrase take advantage, but like, you have genius within your organization. Take advantage of the genius in your organization. Why would you erase it? And so if we can start, I believe that everybody, when we get down to this kind of essence, right? Everybody wants to take advantage of all the genius that's in their organization. So what are you doing today that will allow you to take advantage of the genius, of your own genius and other people's genius? And what are you doing that is snuffing out genius? Because I don't think any one of us wants to get to the end of our days and be like, I was awesome at snuffing out genius my entire career.
Oh, that would be heartbreaking. And that's the beautiful thing too. And it's one of the things that was really important to me when I created the NeuroDrive team, because I was looking at, as being a business owner, as having been in corporate, and I thought, the worst thing that I ever got was when somebody said, okay, you got to start this initiative and it's all this money and all this time and you got to do all of this stuff to make this work. I'm like, okay, I am a neurodivergent brain, so that is not the right solution, in my opinion. So I said, okay, let's do this differently. Let's do this in a way that's actually going to help people and help companies, because that's my goal. And my goal is to help companies, help people, help cultures. And the most important thing is we just meet you where you are. We're going to look at what's your zone of genius. What are you doing really well? And just where are some areas that we can tweak? What are some things that we can adjust? What are some things that are just a simple shift with a conversation that gets everybody thinking about things in a different way? Like, what's your peak performance time? Let's talk. Let's look in our team. Let's all decide. Let's share this. And when we can do that, we're just meeting people where they are and not judging and not saying you got to do all this stuff. You got to put like this 60-page playbook together and implement all these support systems before any of this will work. That's bunk. I'm sorry. It just is. That's just me. I'm practical.
And Mark saying he's excited to be part of such an important topic. And I know I was honored to be asked to be part of the conversation as well, because this, I'm going to say it again, because I'm going to say it at the end of every one of these episodes. And at some point, you guys are just going to say it to other people. And that's the whole point, is that participating in a conversation, and you guys, I couldn't even keep up with the chat today. You guys were chatting with each other so much, like high five, you, great job. Connect with each other as well. The people that you saw here today are passionate about this conversation. And one of the best ways for us to create a shift in the conversation is to remain in the conversation. So as much as I think, yeah, you could come to one of Tracy's lives and just leave with everything you need, not a thing. You got to stay in the conversation. I'm here to host conversations so that we can all stay in the conversation. This is my goal in life. Like I said, bring you conversations that I don't think people are having enough of. And so, one, if you guys want to have any conversations, please reach out to me. I would love to have you on the show. But stay in the conversation, find your way, right? Like there's not one right way to stay in the conversation. Connect with me, connect with Carole Jean, connect with each other, right? Just send the replay to your friends who you know are in this conversation. Stay in the conversation. I encourage you, because this is what helps us. to make a shift. I just want to go quickly back to one of the things Amanda was saying about inclusivity. Right? Who in the room is calling it inclusive? Because if it's not somebody from an underserved community, then it's probably not actually inclusive. And if you guys are passionate about that topic, this is why I wanted to bring this up before we leave, you must come back next week. Next week, we're going to be on Thursday instead of Friday at this time because I have a childcare thing. So watch your LinkedIn for the invite because I'll invite you. But we are having a conversation about, is it really inclusion if the people who historically have been discriminated against are not included? So that's going to be a good one. I'm very excited to have Jackie Turnwald joining me for that one. So you guys do not want to miss that. It's going to be great. Thank you, Carole Jean. You guys connect with Carole Jean. Sign up for the series is starting next week, right? Like August. It's August. Good.
Yep. It's starting off. We've got our first event kicking off on August the 9th. I'll be at Ottscape teaching all about burnout and restoration. And next Thursday, Ali Arena kicks off our XXO Connect room. Mind Your Artistic Brain has partnered with XXO Connect as part of the workplace benefits package. So we are in there answering all your questions between different brains at work. So that is a fantastic program. And if you guys are interested in getting that as part of your company, make sure you reach out and connect with me and I can hook you up.
Oh man, and we won't get into all of the amazing benefits that the XXO Connect community provides to people, but connect with Carole Jean and learn more about it because Jason, who runs that community, also amazing. Connect with him. But thank you, Carole Jean, for this wonderful episode today. I always have so much fun chatting with you. Thank you to Mark and Amanda and Elena and Lydia and... there were a whole bunch of other people.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait to go back and read all the chat and the comments because it was going by so fast.
Jen and Eric and
guys, please do message me, reach out. Let's continue this conversation like Tracy said. Tracy, thank you so much for having me today and for sharing this very important conversation. You, my friend, always light my brain up.
And let's just all light each other's brains up, shall we? Let's go light up brains this afternoon. Although I think it was Emily saying that her brain hurts. So maybe you just need a break with your brain as well. Also acceptable. Take breaks for your brains when you need it. But I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation today. This is a weekly conversation series. So I'd be glad to see you back in the chat. Always. Carole Jean again, my friend. Always a pleasure. Thank you guys for being in the chats. And until next time, permission to do you, everybody.